Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Conrad Dungca, who served for over 30 years in the United States Navy, retiring at the rank of captain. He is currently working at Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific, and you may hear us refer to that as NIWC PAC, as the lead systems engineer of the Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Department. Conrad Dungca, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Hey, John. Thank you for that great intro. Been looking forward to this, really excited, and very, very appreciative for this opportunity. And I hope a lot of the stuff we discuss can resonate with the folks listening. And I'm definitely looking forward to the discussion.
And before we get started, to our audience, I would just like to mention that Conrad's opinions are his own and do not reflect the official positions of NIWC Pacific or the Department of the Navy or the Department of Defense. The conversation that I'd like to have with you today, Conrad, will cover, not surprisingly, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or ISR. But before we get into this topic, could we please start by getting your assessment of our strategic landscape?
Yeah, sure. So you look out at the news today and, whatever your sources of news and information are, and it is a very complicated world. I mean, there are a lot of things going on, and these are definitely interesting times. And I look out and I see, the stuff happening inside our country, stuff happening outside the country. And, sometimes there's that sense of doom and gloom on, what is coming next. You see a lot of these challenges that we're facing. At the same time, I like to think that, maybe part of it is because we have a lot of extra information coming our way. I look back at when I was younger and looking at the times back then, maybe there was as much going on, but maybe the information just was not as available. So maybe, that's part of the reason why I was not as worried back then as I find myself now with all the stuff happening. I'm just hoping that, going forward, things could get better. We can get better assessments of what different activities transpire. And but I definitely have to say, compared to in my lifetime, these are definitely challenging times, and a lot of stuff going on that a lot of people are aware of.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Could you please give our audience a little bit more background about your career?
Sure. So as you've mentioned, I was in the Navy for 30 years. It all started back in Los Angeles, where I grew up. I nothing out of the ordinary, typical, young kid who looked and saw a lot of opportunity, whether it was trying to be a firefighter or a policeman or a member of the military, etc. And I remember one day one of these random mail-in cards had come in from the Naval Academy. And so looking at which colleges to apply to at the time, I gave the Naval Academy a shot, and fortunately I was accepted. I took a quick tour of the Naval Academy before giving my formal agreement to attend, just to see how it was like. And once I got there, I fell in love with the place, liked how the East Coast was so different from the West Coast, wanted to experience something different. And I thought the Naval Academy would be a great opportunity because the Navy has many different aspects to it. You got aviation, you got submarines, you got surface warfare, and it continues to grow. We've got a lot more stuff now than when I attended back in the late 80s. So did my time at the Naval Academy, graduated with a systems engineering degree, went straight into flight school as my specialty, eventually became a helicopter pilot where I served in Guam, flew there, and then did some other interesting things such as Navy recruiting, working at an embassy, a bunch of other extra Navy duties that have set me around. I supported Operation New Dawn and Operation OEF, Enduring Freedom, and eventually became a civilian when I had left the Navy and joined Space and Naval Warfare Systems Center at the time. And we recently got renamed to Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific. And so have been working there as a civilian. And I am currently the Information Surveillance Reconnaissance Lead System Engineer for that department. So happy to be working out as a civilian in a civilian capacity and using my engineering background, which I studied way back in school, which is still pretty relevant today.
All right, excellent. Well, let's, if we may, Conrad, start stepping into ISR. So maybe we can start with the basics. So for many in our audience, some may not know what ISR is at all, and others may have only a surface understanding of what ISR is. So could you maybe give us just like a 101 of what is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance? Why is it done, and those types of things?
So ISR, we do that in the military much more heavily now than in the past. We do it because it enables our military to understand basically where they're going and what they need to do. So a good example of the importance of ISR that I heard was when I went to a DARPA conference, the Defense Advanced Research Program Agency. And it was interesting how the person on stage said, okay, what would you feel if I were to tell you that me and my senior members here, the 4 other senior members, could beat the Lakers in a basketball game? And, of course, there was like a lot of laughter in the audience. And then he said, well, what? And he says, I don't blame you all for laughing, but what would I tell you, or what would you think if I told you that we would blindfold all the Lakers players and then we'd play basketball that way? And so that kind of like wrapped it all together of what ISR does for an organization, specifically for the military. So if your adversary does not have the right ISR, in other words, they're blindfolded, then no matter how good they seem to be or what their capabilities are, how potent they are, you could overcome that easily. And that's the example that I came out with, which was perfect. So yeah, so that's why our military does ISR, why it's important for us, is because we need to make sure we have a good understanding of what's around us, and we have a good understanding of what other folks outside the country may be thinking of doing. And just getting that information is critical. Just having your eyes and ears, your senses open, and it's obviously just not eyesight. So ISR encompasses a lot of other things than just optics, just like your senses, having vision, your hearing, etc., your senses in general. So hopefully that answers. That answers.
No, that is a really vivid example that really brings into focus the importance of ISR. The United States military, by many authorities, is still considered to be the mightiest military on earth. Yet, if we do not have a robust, adaptable, persistent ISR capability, then we might as well be blindfolded.
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah. No, that is awesome stuff. So how does ISR play a role at, say, like the strategic, operational, and tactical levels of engagement?
There are multiple roles. So if you look at the strategic part, having our ISR and being aware of what's going on outside our borders or even within our borders, but just being aware gives us direction on where to focus in the future. So what types of technologies we'd like to refine or develop. Also gives us directions on some of our policies, and that goes way up above, my pay grade, but it does affect the executive level and higher level type decisions on which way to go. In the operational and tactical areas, that's closer to the day-to-day battlefield, if you want to call it. So obviously, if you're in a tactical situation where you're trying to figure out where to put your forces or what actions you're going to take logistically or in other aspects, then ISR again would influence those aspects of your operation. Tactically tactically and operationally, those are two of the same. One is just a little more specific than the other, but the closer, whether you're looking far out in a strategic sense or closer in a more tactical, to the minute sense, ISR does have a big impact on how you go about your actions.
A parable that I tell frequently to people about this podcast forum is that we have guests like you, Conrad, onto the podcast to give your perspective on national security and information and cognitive related problems. And the parable that I use is everybody's familiar with it, is the parable of three blind men and the elephant, right? You've got people with their hand on an elephant, but the beast is so big that people can describe it in different ways. They're describing what it is that they sense. Like if you're touching the trunk, you might describe it as a snake, or maybe it's the tail, right? You describe the tail as a snake, you describe the leg as a tree and the trunk as a something. Anyway, you get the point. I'm messing up the parable here on the podcast, but when you put all the pieces together, it's like, okay, well, what feels like a snake, and it also feels like a tree, but it also slithers, however you describe the trunk, right? What could that be? Well, it's not a cow. It's not a house. It's not a car. Oh, and maybe it's an elephant, right? And so you put together like multiple pieces of the same item, and you get a truer sense of what it is from different perspectives, right? And so I would imagine that the same kind of analogy applies in the world of ISR, right? Do you think you could unpack that in more ISR language for our audience?
So in our department at NIWC Pacific, we spend a lot of time getting inputs from folks on what ISR means and what that is going to do for us. And our department head, after several inputs, we decided on making our logo or our description, our basic description for our department was illuminating the information darkness. So just like you said, it's the unknown out there. You just don't want to go there blind, right? You'd like to know as much as you can about your destination before getting there, and kind of related to what you said, if you look at just one angle, one source of information, then you don't have the whole picture, and you may have a different idea of what you're getting into. So with all the different sources, thankfully we have a lot of different sources. The best way to do it is just hopefully just gather as much information as you can, understanding that not all the sources are completely accurate, but at least with what with the experience you have and hopefully with a lot of these different sources that you get, whether from whatever source, you could call it for whatever signal, or you could call from whatever source, whatever the media is telling you, or etc. Just that whole combination of sources and being able to rationally look at it and give you that best, most educated guess of what's out there, I think is the best way I could put it.
I see. We didn't discuss this ahead of time, but does the concept of the OODA loop and making speeding up the cycle of gathering intelligence and then getting that information to an operator or decision maker and then doing it over and over again faster and faster, is that something that is front of mind for you and your colleagues?
Yes, definitely. And going back to what I mentioned earlier about the research and development and the impacts of knowing what's out there and driving our direction in developing new systems and new methodologies in the ISR world. We obviously would like to keep everything as connected as possible. We'd like to share information, and this doesn't just go in the military. I mean, if you just look at outside, for whether it's the world of financing, whether it's the world of tourism, any of these fields, right? I mean, the more connected folks are, and I'm sure a lot of the social media folks are happy about that as well, that they get their little connections and get their say. But the more connected folks are, and the faster people could share information, just in general, in whatever field it is, the better they could act, the more comfortable they could act, and the more capable they are. And just a quick story, when I was at the airport, there was this disparity between my ID, which had my legal name, my full legal name, and my ticket, which had my shortened nickname. And so, of course, since they didn't match, even though it was just one letter off, the person at the gate said, "Well, I can't let you in, sir. These don't match." And back in the old days, I was already anticipating, just like in the old days, of getting out of line and running over to the ticket counter and trying to, fix that issue. But the gate guard was kind enough to say, "Okay, well, why don't you just go in your app and just request a new boarding pass right there?" And right there, real time, without having to get out of line and possibly miss my flight, just opened up my application and was able to get a new boarding pass immediately. Just basically just typed my name in, scanned took a picture of my ID. I forgot the steps, but it was less than 30 seconds to a minute it took. And then I was well on my way again. So again, the more connected you are, whether you're able to do something or understand information, beforehand, I think the better it is for anyone in any application, not just military.
It dawns on me, Conrad, that we've been talking about ISR, but we haven't really broken apart that acronym into the three components: intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Could you maybe touch on each of those components and how they interact with one another?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, a lot of folks look at ISR as one thing. It's ISR, but you're right. There are three distinct components. They do feed on each other and they're related, but they are separate. So intelligence, the way I like to think about it, is the information that's gathered, the information that you get. So trying to get this data and information, or turning the data into some useful information that allows you to act a certain way or influences some of your decisions, is what I see as intelligence. Surveillance and reconnaissance are a little bit tricky because they're a little more related to each other, where surveillance, as the word implies, you kind of go out and you try to gather that data. So, just sending a scout or sending somebody out and gathering information is what surveillance is to me. and monitoring what's going on. And reconnaissance is similar to it. To me, it means also going out and gathering information, but it's a slightly different flavor, as in it's more of going out into the unknown, whereas surveillance is you may understand what you're looking at already, but you're monitoring. It's more of a monitoring versus reconnaissance is more of a discovery. So those three parts of ISR, is what helps you get that information and turn it into something that you'd like to utilize.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I feel like I'm going about this backwards. So to our audience, please bear with me a little bit here. So I should have asked this right up at the top, Conrad, but NIWC Pacific. Where does NIWC Pacific reside within the Navy? Are you guys part of the operating forces, or are you supporting establishment, or where do you guys fall?
Yes, so we are Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific. We are one of the Navy laboratories. We do not actively participate in operations, as in sending folks out to in a military sense. We are actually a group of scientists, engineers, all the support folks. You got your admin folks, your legal folks, the support staff there. But we are a big organization in San Diego, here at Point Loma, and our main mission is to be the best laboratory that we can in order to provide products and services in support of the Navy. So if you like to look back in the past, radar and sonar, those pieces of equipment, those systems were not developed by the sailor and the soldier, or the folks out there that are serving in the military in an operational sense. We at NIWC PAC develop things like systems such as radar and sonar in order to support the Navy. So we're more of we're one of the technical arms of the Navy, and there's various other labs that the Navy has, and the Army and all the other services have as well. So we're just one of the labs that focus on research and development and technology.
I see. So does NIWC Pacific report up to like the ONR, the Office of Naval Research, ultimately?
Not quite. So ONR is a separate. So we don't report directly under ONR, but you could say that ONR and NIWC Pacific, when they report up, eventually they come up to a common commander there. So yes, ONR is another laboratory, and they don't necessarily focus on what NIWC focuses on. NIWC, of course, focuses on anything in the C4 ISR world. So C4 ISR, we already discussed ISR, but the C4 is the command, control, communications, and computers. So anything that deals with data, information, that kind of in that field, that's our specialty. And you have other labs that in the Navy that maybe develop airplanes like NavAir, and other like NAVC is more on the ships and the submarines. But we develop the systems that help C4 ISR inside of the Navy.
I see. What are some of the big problems that you guys are grappling with right now with respect to ISR? Yeah, I mean, like open problems, obviously, but what are some things that you guys are trying to solve?
Oh, sure. Well, they're always, we try to be on the leading edge of technology, and we have a lot of very intelligent folks, new folks, senior folks that work at NIWC Pacific. It's always just trying to, the difficult problems we have is just basically trying to come up with the next generation of, whatever of equipment. Similar, like if you're trying to develop an airplane, right? You're always trying to make the better airplane. Well, the same thing here with NIWC Pacific. just trying to make the better system so people are better connected, so it's faster, it's more reliable. You can't ever, I guess you can't ever get perfect in that sense. You could always keep striving to get better and better. And those are the everyday problems that we solve. How can we do things better? How can we better service the Navy? How can we make information gathering better for the Navy? How can our systems be more reliable? And even the other aspects as well is, how can we make it smoother and quicker to get our systems that we develop to the Navy system? So that's more of a logistics problem. But yeah, we have many issues that we always tackle daily, and that's why we got a lot of smart people. And we all have good confidence that we're trucking along pretty well and utilizing the best that we've got with our resources.
I see. What role does ISR play in information operations? And I guess just to lead the question just a little bit more, I guess I'm wondering about both offensive information operations and defensive, or being trying to reduce the likelihood that information operations is effective on blue forces.
Sure, exactly. So as I mentioned before, with the intelligence gathering and the data and how your ISR can shape your direction, it's the same thing with obviously ISR has a big impact on how you go about with information operations, because understanding the threats or the actions that are taking place out there is going to drive our direction on what we need to work on now, what we need to anticipate, and where we need to focus our resources to. So it has a very big impact on both offensive and defensive. And just coming out with a hypothetical example, if we find out that other organizations are aware of or believe that we have a weakness in a certain area, ISR enables you to predict or make an educated guess on the threats or the issues that could impact you, whether it's offensively or defensively. So for instance, if ISR enables us to understand that some organizations believe we have a weakness in a certain area, and they'd be coming in and exploiting that weakness, then it would help us maybe build our defenses around that area. And on the offensive sense, where if an organization may be planning something, and we're able, with our ISR again, we're able to find out what areas of weaknesses we can exploit in order to prevent any kind of malicious activity, then obviously we focus toward that direction, and we try to stop, or we try to deter any malicious organization from carrying out its act. So basically, ISR has a huge impact, whether defensively or offensively.
Right. And could you also talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and machine-based decision making with respect to ISR, and how do you go about developing machine and sensor integration capabilities that are somewhat autonomous, and when do you hand over information to people, to humans in the loop, so that they can take it from here? Thank you, AI, for serving up these insights to us, but these kinds of decisions are decisions that we are reserving for people. Do you kind of get what I'm saying? There's
Yes.
It's almost like a conveyor belt of capability, where you go from sensing and crunching data through an algorithm, and at some point you have to hand it over to people so that the people can use their brain to decide what to do.
Yes. Wow. That is a huge topic, which I'm glad you asked about, John. I mean, that's because you see in the news a lot nowadays, and it also is concerning as well. I could see how, the general public could be concerned about it. About, you learn about AI and machine learning and computers taking over the world, and these intelligence, surpassing human intelligence, and basically where it could spiral down to doom.
Driverless cars, right?
Yes.
I guess I think of driverless cars as being these ISR machines that are continually gathering information from the local environment, road signs, pedestrians, other vehicles, stoplights, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
machine is taking all this information in, and 95% of the time, the machine is making the decision on whether to slow down or speed up or change lanes. But at some point, the human is still ultimately responsible, and at some point, the machine is not good enough to make subtle choice. It's kind of like, I think that this is more of like a supply chain kind of a thing, right? There's like the last mile problem. Like
Yeah.
machines are really good at like 98% of certain tasks, but it's that last 2%, that last mile, where you have to have people in order to make the best decision.
Yes, and you described it perfectly. And I've been reading a lot about AI, and in fact, it's one of the books that I'll recommend later. But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. With AI, there are some things that AI and machines can do that are much better than what a human can do. And just for an example, I mean, if I were to fly my aircraft on my own and just try to fly it at the same altitude for 4 hours straight, I don't think I could match a machine like the autopilot that could fly at that altitude for 4 hours straight. I mean, it would do it a lot much easier than I would be able to, right? It would take a lot more effort on my part as a human than for the machine to just autocorrect itself and continue flying, on that same altitude in an aircraft. And there are many instances of that. As far as AI in general, and this is my opinion, because you see a lot of you see a wide spectrum of, non-believers in AI, and then the other spectrum of AI is where it's at. We got to go completely, and then you kind of have the middle ground. Well, me myself, from personal and professional experience, and from a lot of the stuff that I've been reading lately, I'm more in the middle somewhere, where I don't think you could get rid of the human in the loop. And I hope we never get rid of the human in the loop, because yeah, there is some technical, I would say there's some technical difficulties with that, where, like you said, you're driving a car and you could program that car to do everything, stay within the white lines or the dashed lines, and look at the highway speeds and go at that speed, do not exceed that speed, etc. But I don't know, I'm not convinced that we could put everything in there to allow the machine to learn, just like what the human mind, with all our experiences and how broad the human mind is, to be able to take every single, let me put it this way, to take in as many uh, unexpected factors as what the human mind could do. So, and I want to put it back to the context of that self-driving car. So if you have a self-driving car that's doing that, and it's fine on 99% of the days where you're just driving from, point A to point B, it'll get you there. But what if there is one day where, we didn't program something in there, where maybe a helicopter is coming straight at the car from the sky, and the programmer or the person who developed the AI was not able to account for that, or did not account for that, because there's just so many infinite things. Whereas you or me driving, right? We're driving from point A to point B every day safely, but then we see something unforeseen, like that helicopter just coming at you from the sky at a certain angle, and we'll probably be able to dodge it easily, or some kind of reflection happening that we didn't expect. That's a reflection. I'm going to keep going. Whereas the AI depending on how it was developed or programmed or the parameters that it had. So I think to answer your question, I personally, I am hoping that we never take the human out of the loop. We always have that human, it's not just a data-driven, okay, 49% this will happen, 51% this will happen. So AI goes with the 51% probability versus, right? Because there may be other factors in there that it may not see. And so that's what I hope for. And I think, and personally, with what I've been reading, I don't know if we're quite there yet anyway. I don't know if we're there. And I'm not just speaking for NIWC here, I'm just talking in general. I don't know if we're able to just create something, that intelligent where it's accelerated and it's beyond what a human would do or think.
It's a well-known example now, but sticking with the driverless car stuff, that it is possible to inject false data into the algorithm, right? Just by simply changing the way a stop sign looks by just adding a couple of yellow sticky notes to a stop sign, or just altering it really like minimally, where a human would still recognize it as a stop sign. Well, it's like, obviously that's a stop sign with some spray paint on it, what's the big deal?
Right.
But for an AI, it no longer looks like a stop sign, it looks like something completely different. And so I want to take that same kind of a concept, and now we have Chat GPT and these algorithms which are capable of like mass producing blog articles and websites. And I'm sure that this capability has been around in various different levels of maturity for some time. But what I'm getting at is, I'm sure one of the ways that intelligence services harvest data is by, looking at all kinds of data which are available out there: blog articles, websites, news feeds. And those news feeds can now be tainted deliberately with with a sufficient amount of false information, so that if we are not at least taking that kind of a thing into account, we can be sucking up, bogus information into our decision algorithms, or collecting bogus information, and then it winds up in faulty recommendations to decision makers.
Exactly.
What a problem. Anyway, it sounds like you and your colleagues there at NIWC Pacific are on it, so that is a comfort, at least. So well, this has been fantastic, Conrad. I'd like to ask you just a couple of typical closeout questions. So we have a lot of students that listen to this podcast. What are some what's a research question that a student might examine, which would be a helpful contribution to what's needed relative to ISR?
I have two questions. So
they
go in two similar directions, but a little bit different angles. So I would say the first question would be just to look at how how ISR has evolved, and what ISR, the impacts of ISR, and what ISR is. So I think with that, going towards that direction, you could kind of see where we stand as far as the different, whether it's social or military or whatever field, political, the different ISR devices or systems that are out there that we have developed. And I think it'll give a lot of insight on, are we headed the right way? Is this, it gives some good philosophical questions there, as well as a technical understanding of where our current technology levels are. The other question I would have is, this is more on a society type level, is how has ISR impacted us? Like, because of our current ISR abilities at this point, how has that changed the world? How has that made us, like, what direction are we headed now because of that? So kind of two similar questions there, but I think worthwhile endeavors to just in the ISR realm, just to see how ISR impacts the world in general.
Yeah, excellent, excellent.
Mhm.
And then finally, do you have a book or other online resource suggestion?
Yes, and I'll recommend two books which I've read. Well, read one and I'm halfway through the other. And so so the first book is called Fleet Tactics and Naval Operations, the third edition, and it's written. It was published by the Naval Institute Press. You can see it on Amazon there. Written by Captain Wayne Hughes and Rear Admiral Robert Girrier. So this book is great because it talks about not so much direct tactics of what the Navy does. Again, it's called Fleet Tactics and Naval Operations, but it talks about throughout history what the Navy was doing and basically how technology changed the way the Navy did things. So it goes into how in World War II, when you discovered radar, the Navy changed its tactics there. Even back in the old days, when you went from sail to steamship, how did the Navy in particular change that way? And then as you read forward into it, it touches on ISR, it touches on drones, unmanned vehicles, hypersonic weapons, that kind of stuff in general. Of again, another revolution for the Navy of how we do business and how our tactics are going to change because of the new technologies. So again, highly recommend that book. And then the second book I want to recommend is something that we were discussing, and I loved your question about the artificial intelligence, because I was ready when you brought that up, I was ready to talk about it for hours, but I know we're time limited because it's such an intriguing topic. But and it's great. I mean, we just talked about the one. I could draw out a bunch of other examples that help that were developed from this book that I was reading. But it's called The Myth of Artificial Intelligence: Why Computers Can't Think the Way We Do. And it's by Erik Larson, and he used to work for DARPA and is a computer scientist. And it's not a I'm not trying to debunk artificial intelligence in general, but I think it does touch on the limitations of artificial intelligence, of what other countries tried to do in the past and had failed to do. And I think it helps define artificial intelligence in a better way, because we have artificial intelligence and machine learning, and I believe in those abilities. But at the same time, this helps scope out AI. I think it'll help dissuade that fear of people have of, turning on the machine and all of a sudden humans are helpless and we get taken over by this supreme intelligence. This kind of explains and it helps break down, the different parts of artificial intelligence, and hopefully will, like I said, calm people's fears of, getting the super intelligence that's just going to run away and start ruling our world there. The book says it's probably not going to happen. And I think it has some good examples of why it will not happen either. So, yeah. So hopefully, again, a great book. I'm halfway through it myself, and it's great. I'm only halfway through it because I'm really absorbing it and going really slow. And it talks about the history and where we're going.
All right, excellent suggestions. And with that, Conrad Dungca, thank you so much for being a guest on the Cognitive Crucible.
All right. Thank you, John. Thank you for having me. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Really appreciate your time.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.